My Zoom window is Danny McNamarra, and I shall be your chair for today. In just a moment, we shall hear from our guest speaker, Ellen Rowbottom, about the arguments put forward in the latest report from the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group report. Excuse me a second while I just admit some more joiners. But first of all, a few words of our own about housekeeping. As Cameron, who represents the technical contribution from our conference team today, has pointed out, there is a transcription service available, and you can switch that on or switch it off according to preference. We are scheduled to run from now until 2:45, so that is effectively 1 hour and 15 minutes. And we do not have any breaks scheduled during that time, but please, if for inclusion or accessibility purposes you have a need to take a break, then please feel free to take a break whenever you need one, for as long as you wish. I'm going to ask people as a default to remain on mute at all times unless specifically called to speak. And please feel free to have your camera on or off. I think there's a sufficiently small number that having the camera on is not going to cause great bandwidth issues for many, but if you prefer to have it off for whatever reason, then please feel completely free to do that. It's best if you're speaking to have it on if you can, because that assists those who need to lip read. And I'll say a little bit more in a housekeeping direction slightly later on. Now, back in 2014, the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group published a report called 1 Million Climate Jobs, and a great many people on the left, or who are interested in environmental issues, will know that that has been a highly influential report for 8 years and more. Well, the group in 2021, just recently, has published an updated version of the report, and that is called Building a Workforce for the Climate Emergency. And that report contains contributions from well-known Green Party figures such as Les Levidoff and Jonathan Essex, but today's speaker was lead author on a number of chapters in the report. She's also a member of Leeds Trades Union Council, and has kindly agreed to come along and speak to us today about the arguments put forward in the latest version of the report. So just before I introduce our guest speaker, I'm going to admit one more joiner, and when he arrives, Zoom is telling me that the latest joiner is in the process of joining, and there we are. I think Mark is with us now. So our guest speaker from the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group, lead author, contributing author of the latest version of the report, I'll hand over to Ellen Rowbottom. Ellen, over to you, please.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that, and thanks for inviting me. I would like to share slides if that's okay, but I'm just a bit. Can I do it so that my face is still alongside in case of people needing to lip read?
Yes, you can. So I will now allow permission, so you can. If you try sharing, Ellen, now, we'll see if it works for everyone, but you should be okay.
Yeah, that's,
So because you're speaking, typically you will be at the top of the column of faces on one side of the screen for most people.
Okay, I think that is visible. The slides are visible and the faces are visible. Okay, right. It's just a lot easier to read from the slide rather than from notes. So, right. Well, so I've been asked to focus on some of the principles framing the booklet, which are, as you probably have realised, that we frame it in terms of a recommendation to set up a what we've called a national climate service, which is really a way of sorry, my internet's looks a bit unstable, hope it's working. But it's something that we feel that is necessary for a whole number of reasons, which I'm going to sort of sketch out at the beginning. And then I think what I'll do is to go into a bit more detail, mainly about the energy generating and the buildings retrofit, because those are the two chapters that I've led on. And then if there's enough time, we can skim through the other chapters and have enough time to have some questions and discussion about some of the tricky aspects. So starting with the principles for framing the booklet. So first and foremost, climate justice. So solutions to the climate crisis must not be based on further exploitation of people and resources globally. So we're very much seeing ourselves as part of an internationalist workers' movement and grassroots movement, and of course that's particularly important in this year as we come up to COP27, which is going to be hosted in Egypt, and we're starting to hear a lot of really important information from trade unionists in different countries of the African continent. Yeah, I think we could come back to. The measures that we take to reduce our emissions must be such as to reduce inequality and bring increased quality of life to workers and communities, both locally and globally, of course. The workers in high emissions sectors need planned support to train and move into those newer sectors, many of which are starting from a very low base of having very few skilled and qualified people to work in them, to good example of this being insulating homes and a lot of aspects of land work, forestry and so on, that have a very low worker base at the moment, but need to be hugely expanded. When we talk about climate justice, we're also talking about taking our fair share in terms of the rate and depth with which we cut emissions. Obviously, the countries in the wealthier global north that bear the chief responsibility for the emissions up to this point need to take a larger share of the responsibility, which is not reflected in the net zero by 2050 goals. We're not looking at business as usual. We are looking at some deep structural changes to our society and our economy, not a replacement of one technology by another that just lets us carry on. And certainly not looking at speculative technologies that, instead of actually reducing emissions, claim to be able to capture those emissions and store them, and essentially to enable industry and energy to carry on as usual. And of course, they're based on market mechanisms like carbon credits and offsets, which have actually, if anything, have probably given a boost to the ability to pollute rather than suppressing it. So I think by this time it's probably quite well known that there are numerous papers and reports that have come out from quite across the political spectrum, or at least a certain way across it, making the case that a transition to climate jobs, a transition to a low carbon economy, will create a very large number of jobs, create far more jobs than lost through that transition. But there's very little sign of it happening. And of course, the market is the chief reason why it's not happening. We don't have, I think we're in a situation now where workers very much understand that the transition is necessary. Many workers very much understand that either that the industry that they're in is going to have to make a lot of changes in terms of the technologies that it uses or in terms of the products that it produces, and that will involve a lot of perhaps reskilling and upskilling. And many workers do understand that they may need to be transitioned completely into new sectors. And it's not that they're unwilling in many cases to do so. It's that there are so many barriers in terms of not being able to access training, not being able to, that it's financially impossible at the moment for the majority of workers. And simply the jobs aren't there in many cases that they're supposed to be able to move into. So this does need a coordinated approach, and in particular, there needs to be far more attention to supply chains at one end of the sort of production chain. For example, we talk a lot about wind farms and solar panels and so on, but very soon we're going to hit bottlenecks in those technologies because we haven't built up the supply chains. And the same goes for what happens at the end of the use of a particular product or a particular installation, that we need a huge amount of, we need really new sectors that are devoted to the recovery and reuse of materials, particularly scarce minerals, metals and so on, concrete, steel, all these kinds of things. We're really very, very lacking in the sort of thinking about reusing things, as opposed to just continuing to ransack the earth and ransack other people's environments and communities. So these are some of the reasons why public ownership of some of these key sectors of the economy, energy generation, transmission and storage, is necessary, as well as large sectors of industry. And so hence we talk about National Climate Service to coordinate this work across the economy, because it needs cross-sectoral thinking as well. We can't be looking at each different sector in a silo. There are so many interconnections that need to be thought about. And of course, we need to ensure that any worker losing work in a high carbon sector will be guaranteed permanent, well-paid and trade unionised jobs in work that reduces emissions. And by that, we don't only mean, yes, we do mean heavy industry and energy generation and building and so forth, but we also mean things like care work, education and health, which are intrinsically, a lot of workers have interest in transitioning into those sectors, but of course wages are so terrible in those kinds of sectors that this is something we need to recenter and revalue those kinds of jobs as part of our transition as well. And we need to be sure that, because some of the work that we need to do will create huge amounts of jobs over a period of several years. For example, implementing a much better public transport system, that we need to build the infrastructure, but then the numbers of jobs in that particular sector will decline, not to its previous level, not to its current level, but it will decline. So another function of the National Climate Service would be to say, look, you are a public service employee, and if the work isn't there in a particular role, you'll be guaranteed to be transitioned into a role where the work is needed, where the labour is needed, and to be given appropriate training and support to do that. So, okay, time's going on already. So just going on to the energy generation, I'm sort of going to skip this, that slide really repeats what I've already said. We begin frame the energy chapter by talking about the importance of reducing energy demand, that is absolutely key, because if we think about ending fossil fuels, as we all know that we need to do as rapidly as possible, what that implies is that if we carry on with business as usual, we're talking about a quadrupling essentially of electricity generation, and producing all of that from genuine renewable sources, which and the word genuine there being the operative word, because we've got a lot of support there for sources that we don't think are genuinely renewable and or low carbon. What we're taking as a framework is a doubling of overall electricity generation, but alongside that, halving overall energy demand, because it's the only way we can do it. Technologically, it's the only way we can do it, but also looking with the kinds of measures that we're proposing that we think will create a lot of jobs and also improve quality of life, particularly for people at the lower end of the income scale. And then there are that we need to do that currently are not sufficiently happening. And under the market-based system, the only things that can happen are the things that can attract private investment, or that can attract government subsidies, and which are actually government subsidies are geared towards creating an environment where private investment is more attractive. And what it's doing is blocking a lot of the technologies that we do need. Like, we need a lot of innovation in storage technologies. We need a lot more innovation in some of the generating technologies, such as tidal stream and wave power, which are being blocked really at the development stage by lack of investment. And instead, we've got incredibly expensive technologies being invested in, such as nuclear, that, as we know, well, as we argue here, that are not safe, and also can't, even if they were safe, wouldn't be implemented in the timescale. So I think this is probably the kind of key bit, things that a National Climate Service could do that we're seeing not happening at the moment. So get rid of some of these distortions and blocks that I've been talking about, that the market and the vested interests and the corporate lobbyists are bringing into the transition pathway. And they really are, the corporate lobbyists are really taken control of the messaging around the transition. If you go to any of the kind of industry workshops, they're talking about these amazing industrial clusters that we're going to have around the Humber and Teesside, in my parts of the country, all based on a completely phantom technology at the moment, which is carbon capture and storage. But they're talking about, they're all coming together talking about this brilliant for such a wide range of different industries, some of which are industries that we shouldn't have to the same extent. For example, things like animal feed for industrialized farming. Right, so supporting technologies that are needed but are being currently held back, ensuring a fair transition of workers, as what we've estimated is that we need to create about an additional 500,000 jobs in energy generation, transmission, storage, and some of the supply chains. But it's very much a kind of movable feast, depending on where you draw the parameters, where you draw the boundaries of what counts as an energy worker. It could be a lot more if you include a lot more of the servicing and the some of the smaller scale stuff. For example, there could be tens of thousands of jobs in installing heat pumps. We don't really know yet. Ensuring equitable access to affordable energy, that's clear, particularly in the current context of real crisis of poverty and unaffordable energy prices. I've mentioned supply chain industries and recycling, and then of course democratic and integrated planning of a highly complex system that needs to involve large and small scale generation. There's a question that we do need to come back to. I think the relationship between the big utilities and the smaller scale stuff that's happening in local authorities amongst community cooperatives and that range of things. And just an NB there, because it's important that the extent to which the domestic sector is key, not only to reducing emissions overall, but to the efficient load spreading, which is going to be really key in a system where we don't have what Climate Change Committee refers to as dispatchable energy, where they're mostly talking about gas that can be saved and used at times of peak demand. We need new storage systems. We need safer storage systems. For example, batteries that don't rely on rare materials or materials that are creating huge human rights abuses through the extraction. and this is possible. But we also need to use much more basic methods of spreading the load, such as, I mean, a well-insulated house is a storage itself. Heating systems such as solar collectors or heat pumps using well-insulated water tanks are a storage system in themselves. So there's a whole range of things needed there. Just, I think what I've already said covers the reasons why homes are very important. But I just want to say a little bit more about homes, because I think it's an insulating. It is. It's one of the areas that's received a lot of public attention, obviously as a result of activists such as Insulate Britain, but also from the industry, from many different sources. And it's incredibly frustratingly being held back by the lack of local authorities, because they're the bodies that would have the ability to be able to implement this in a sensible, integrated, well-targeted way. But it's the difference that this can make is huge. We can cut the energy demand from homes in half within about 10 years, and then going on in a second phase to cut down to about no more than 20%, let's say, of current energy demand. And if you add that to the use of low carbon energy technologies, we're actually getting the emissions from homes and buildings down to about 5% of what they are now. But there are so many barriers. For example, retrofit needs a proper skilled assessment of every building, and a whole house plan is vital. Now, at the moment, there are only, we've guessed, and I guess I'm not really the key expert here, but that my co-author on this is a practicing sustainability architect, and his estimate is that there are probably about 1,000 people in the country who really have, who are fully skilled to be able to do this kind of work. It doesn't mean to say that everybody working on retrofit has to be have that level of skill and knowledge, but there need to be sufficient people to ensure that it's done properly. And the assessment of a whole house, it means creating a plan which is individual to each house. That doesn't necessarily mean we've got to do it all at once. We can do the low-hanging fruit bits the bits that make the biggest difference in the shortest time. But it's got to be, first of all, it's got to be a no regrets approach that looks forward to the further interventions that might be needed further down the line to really bring the home up to the most energy efficient possible. Also, is aware of the problems that can arise when work isn't done with a view to the energy dynamics of the whole house. For example, if insulation is applied in a way that creates cold bridges, or if heating systems are are installed in a way that doesn't take account of the fact that further down the line they might need to be all the pipework might need to be changed or something like that. I'm conscious that I'm running out of time here, but again, I think it's worth it's probably more worth just going into a little bit of depth.
I wouldn't worry over much about time. I mean, the sort of guidelines that I gave you were really just guidelines, and there is a tremendous amount of new and stimulating material in what you're saying. So let's not fuss too much about time.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will go through this slide at least, because I think it comes back to the question of why we're proposing a national climate service as the key employment model. I probably like most people, I live in a local authority where well, actually, I probably live in a local authority that's done better than most. We've got in Leeds, we've got a majority Labour council, as it happens, who are quite keen on doing this stuff. They've tried very hard. They've applied for numerous grants, some of it being EU based, which obviously isn't going to be there in the future. But it's, you know, they're really struggling because they're having to, all the time, they're applying for grants that have to be, the application has to be in by a certain date, the work by a certain date. It's all really short term, and it's all really short, a small scale. So yes, they've managed to insulate quite a lot of council owned tower blocks. They've managed to put in communal heat pumps in some of those tower blocks, which is brilliant. But there are 800,000 people in Leeds, and this is just, you know, this is scratching the surface. And the problem, the big problem, that the work, there's never enough consistency, there's never enough continuity for supply chains to be created, because people aren't going to set up businesses to provide the components and the materials for this kind of work unless they're sure that there's going to be a market going well into the future. Equally, trainers, we've got a brilliant college in Leeds College of Building. I think it's probably unique in England. I think perhaps not in the whole of the UK, but perhaps in England it is. But they're pretty stuck when it comes to training young people to do this work in the way that it needs to be done, because they can only put on courses to learn skills for which there's a market, and to create that market. And I'm using market in the widest sense now. You have to have sustained, you have to be able to guarantee that sustained opportunities for large scale projects are going to be there. The best way to do this, clearly, is to put the money and the power into the hands of local authorities to do this on a mass scale, in a planned way, where both trainers and supply chain businesses can be integrated, and be certain of where it's going. The economic sort of model that's used at the moment is, let's give some incentive to private homeowners to, you know, do their own insulation, or buy their own solar panels or heat pumps or whatever. Well, first of all, obviously that's really badly targeted. It's helping the people who least need the help, in a sense, and very inefficient because the take up is very low, the amount of resources that's put into it are very low. A lot of people still can't afford, they get subsidised, but they still can't afford the remainder of the capital that's needed to do this. And just because you own a home doesn't necessarily mean that you've got loads of spare capital for retrofitting it. And it does nothing really, it does nothing about the private renter sector, which is one of the really big stumbling blocks. I mean, local authorities need far more actually legal powers to enforce standards across the private sector. I should say. So, you know, there are lots of reasons there why it would make a lot of sense for a mass retrofit program to be implemented by well-funded local authorities who have the powers and the skilled assessors and inspectors and so on as well, that can collaborate with the local training providers, that can do projects that are long enough and big enough to be able to carry apprenticeships. Because none of the projects that they've done up to now, I think they've managed to provide about 5 apprenticeships. Well, we need thousands, and this is real. Right, the rest of that slide really is about the modelling of the jobs that we've done, which is taking account of the fact that we are starting from a very, very low base of people appropriately trained. And so it needs to be built year on year. The workforce needs to be built year on year, and at the same time, you're doing a lot of monitoring of the work that's already been done. You're gaining a lot of knowledge about what really works and what doesn't, because there's a huge problem out there of badly implemented retrofit that has actually made people's homes worse. have raised people's energy bills, that have caused dam problems and so on. And naturally, it gives retrofit a bad name, and the right-wing popular press is really seizing on this, and starting campaigns against this kind of stuff, which is going to be a real problem for us in terms of, if you like, winning people over and getting community buy-in to this kind of work. So yeah, it needs to be done right, and so that means that we need to build up the workforce gradually, but by the end of a 10-year phase, we are saying that we need 2 million people working on, and that's just for homes. So you can see the scale of it. And then, of course, most of those will then go on to do further work on the same houses to get them really up to the maximum attainable standard of energy efficiency. But we'll have been doing a smaller number of those throughout the first 10 years to gain the experience to deal with the so-called hard to beat and to deal with the training. So just to quickly show you what's happening in the other chapters. So the transport, really the whole thing revolves around a comprehensive increase in public transport, bus, train, a really comprehensive, accessible public transport system we need. There will be a residual amount of car and van ownership that's needed. Largely that can be helped by things like sharing, renting, carpooling, etc. But where it is really needed, of course, we do need electrification, but we need to get the majority of private cars off the road. And that's one of the things, when we've taken this meeting out to different groups, that's always a thing that people come back to, because probably it's closest to their experience. But it seems like it's difficult for people to believe that we can have a public transport system that really reaches out into rural communities, is accessible for people with disabilities and all the rest. But we argue that we can, if again under the direction of a national climate that integrates all these needs. When we come to heavy industry, very much thinking in terms of not producing stuff that we don't need, being careful, targeting what we produce, so reuse, recycling, reclamation of whatever materials we can, and switching to electrified energy sources wherever we can. Land and agriculture is absolutely massive. All I'm going to say about it here, because I think that it needs a whole day to talk about it, but we've got so few people working on the land, whether it's in forestry, whether it's in sustainable food production, whether it's in flood defences, peatland restoration. We just need a massive upscaling of this whole sector. And of course, there are issues in the way that food's distributed. The amount of food that's thrown away is absolutely obscene. But I think people are broadly aware of that, I'm sure. The final section's about the circular economy, and the again, calculations that have been done on this suggest that circular economy, where with a focus on reclaiming, repairing, reusing, recycling, will create many more jobs than are lost. By getting away from the whole system of built-in obsolescence and throwing things away when they're after use and so on. And also that the jobs, from what I've seen of the reports on this, the jobs will largely be concentrated in the areas that are struggling the most economically. So that's a real bonus as well. That's something I've put up a few questions that I think are really worth thinking about. And well, the obvious question: we've got such a reactionary government, and we've got an opposition that isn't like much of an opposition, and in terms of they just really don't get it. or even if they did, the kind of neoliberal mindset just cannot encompass this kind of thinking. So, what do we actually do? What do we actually do as activists, as whether it's politically or whether it's practically? What do we do in this context where we have such a useless, not just in this country, of course, but in terms of the global economy as well. And that has impacts on things like the relationship between in energy between the big utilities and the stuff that a lot of activists are trying to do on a smaller scale locally. How can we have more integrated thinking across sectors, like all the different claims on land use, for example, when we've got an economy that's very much the market kind of creates this very siloed approach to all the different things that we need to do. So that is all I'm going to say. I hope there's still time for people to jump in and have a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ellen. And we shall now open it up for discussion and for questions. Just a few things to say before we do that. If you're not speaking, I would ask that you remain on mute. And if you do wish to speak, there are two ways you can indicate. One is to use your Zoom hand, and you can raise your Zoom hand normally amongst the options in the reactions area at the bottom of your screen. But if that is not possible for you for whatever reason, then use whatever method works for you. And if that means coming off mute and saying, please, may I speak at an appropriate interval, then please, by all means, do that. I would ask everyone, however, to stick to the point. I'd ask people not to talk over each other, and I would ask people also to be respectful of the fact that sometimes some people need a little bit more time than others to express themselves, and in the interests of inclusion and accessibility, we must all recognise and respect that. So I'm going to open it up there. Perhaps I'm happy to take questions, but because there isn't a huge number of us, I'm also happy to take contributions or observations to the discussion. So if I can see Zoom hands or physical hands. I'm not seeing any immediately. I've no doubt some will come in just a moment. I've got Pete. Oh yes, they're starting to come in now. Let's go first of all to Pete Murray, and then we'll go to Roy. So Pete, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I did write something in the chat.
Pete, can you get a bit closer to your microphone? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, I keep forgetting it's usually around the back of my neck rather than in front of my mouth. I wanted to ask Ellen, and perhaps throw it out to the floor as well. Is there any role for nuclear power in any transition to a low carbon economy? I've got my own view on that, which some of you may know, but I also know that I can't remember his name. His second name is Sweeney, the American climate change campaigner. Is very much advocating that nuclear power does have a role, and also some people suggest that, particularly with smaller mini reactors, which Rolls-Royce is being tooled up to use to produce, you could possibly have some form of clean or safe nuclear power, and that we may have to do that whether we like it or not, because that's the only way to get to a low carbon economy. We can't just rely on renewables to do that. So that's either a question or a discussion point addressed to anybody who feels like answering.
I think perhaps what we'll do is, because that is such a clearly important question and one that we all recognise, I will give Ellen the opportunity to respond to that, and then we shall go to Roy, and then Anne Gray, and then Mark Douglas, and then Nicole Haydock in that sequence. Plus anyone else who after that wants to contribute on the nuclear question. But Ellen, would you like to respond on the nuclear question, please?
Well, yeah, I'll outline the position that we've taken on it in the booklet. And I'm not a big expert on any of this, so you know, with due deference to people who perhaps are, but there are a number of objections. The question of small scale modular reactors has been raised. Well, the idea of a modular device is that you stack them together. That's what modular means. So it's not really clear whether it really is any different or any better. It's perhaps it's a different mode of production and assembly, but it's not clear that it's going to be used in a particularly different way. I mean, nuclear energy, as we have it at the moment, is still polluting. For example, it causes significant amounts of thermal pollution of oceans and other bodies of water. For example, you know, the release of hot water into the sea, as well as obviously the problem of long-term storage of nuclear waste hasn't actually been solved. I know people are talking about, I think it's become far more people now talking about let's focus on the development of nuclear fusion rather than fission, which is a different technology, but it's so much in its infancy as a technology. If we do see this at a kind of practicable utility scale, it's going to be 20 years perhaps. Now, you know, we really do need to have this. We need to have this cracked very much quicker than that. And I think the long lead-in time for, you know, it is, regardless of whether we have modular reactors or the traditional model, the long lead-in time is really very, very crucial issue, because, you know, if it takes years to produce a utility, as opposed to, you know, the months that it would create to build an equivalent amount of generating capacity from, let's say, from wind power or solar power, that really is a problem in terms of opportunity losses.
Thank you.
I'll leave it at that and let other people come in on that.
Yeah, I think it would be good, because we can take a good variety of questions if we move through. We might come back to that later on if time allows, but because I'm sure there's a great deal that could be said. But let's move on now to Roy Sanderson.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting presentation, and obviously the booklet seems really good. I'm particularly interested in the National Climate Service, and I wondered a couple of questions. Wonder who has signed up for this, and how many trade unions have, and how it will be run, because obviously, you know, you want workers in the working class to have a lot of control of these organisations. We don't want to go back to top-down control, which is just through nationalisation, unfortunately. My union is Unite, and we seem to be moving in the right direction despite the problems with the Labour Party in terms of green ideas and stuff. And it's more competitive as well, since Sharon Graham was elected. She's really positive. I think we had Alan Simpson, who was the ex-Labour MP in Nottingham, who's an eco-socialist speaker at our branch, which was really good. In terms of the Green Party, I do think there is a manifesto here that lends itself to use within the party to push it into supporting the National Climate Service, if it hasn't already, and also some of the good aims in terms of way it's run. It's important, I think. Obviously, we're eco-socialists and green left, so we do support the idea of a socialist approach to society. So capitalism can't solve this. Capitalism flies around trying to make profit and chase money, and get all the nice adverts on TV, don't you, about how green they are. but it's all greenwash. We know that. They're chasing money and that's it really, but we do need the state, the society to take control, don't we? As simple as that really. We also need to be aware of the issue of, at the moment we have a situation of shipping where a lot of stuff gets imported into the country, which is obviously produced in other parts of the world. And we may need to think about how not importing those things from those countries, but using a different material will impact on those countries which where it comes from. And I think that's an issue we need to look at. Green Left does need to publicise this. We do need to get this national service idea into operation, and the movement needs to take it on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. So just a couple of things to say. I have, and I trust this is okay, Ellen, I have posted in the chat a copy of the latest report from the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group, which you can download. It's quite a big file for a chat upload, but it should be downloadable in a few seconds. I think since we have just about 20-25 minutes to go, it might also be useful at this point if one of my colleagues could post in the chat a link to the Green Left blog and provide an email for Green Left so that people can contact us at Green Left. Green Left is an organisation. We exist within the Green Party to promote ecological perspectives on all of the policy questions that the Green Party deals with, and we do a great deal of outreach work with other organisations with similar views, both in the UK and indeed internationally. So someone will provide in the chat some details that you can use to contact us. Now, Ellen, in amongst Roy's observations there were some questions about this National Climate Service, and in particular, who is it being canvassed with and which organisations have expressed support. So before we go on to Anne Gray and Mark Douglas, and I noticed Nicole, you had your hand up, it's down now, but we'll give you the opportunity in just a moment. Ellen, if you would like to come back on that question.
Yeah, so the previous edition of the Climate Jobs booklet was that came out in 2014 had a whole gallery of trade unions that had endorsed it. I mean, all the major trade unions and a lot of smaller ones. And really, I'd say that the main reason why that hasn't happened this time round is just it's not because they've said we don't support it. It's literally because we were working flat out to try and get it ready to actually try and get it out there in time for the COP26 mobilizations. So there hadn't been time to do the kind of outreach and collaboration with some of the unions. I mean, clearly there are. We take positions in the current edition that are contrary to the positions of some of the major unions, and also contrary to the position that was agreed at last year's TUC conference as well, in terms of things like that we don't agree that we can continue with gas extraction as long as it's mitigated by CCS. As I say, we've taken a stand against nuclear, and we've taken a position against biofuels as in wood pellets being seen as a carbon neutral technology, and then the idea that it's going to be carbon negative if we add carbon capture. This is it's a big campaign that's taking off against this technology that we'd be supporting. So it is it's kind of obviously it's one of those where that there are struggles, the debates to be had within the trade union movement, as well as I think it's part of what we're trying to do is to bring to the attention of the wider climate movement, who are, like most of the general public, unfortunately, are not very well informed about the role of trade unions. Trade union membership is not particularly good in most sectors, and so actually bringing to the attention of the wider movement the actual central role that workers have to play in this, and and the importance of the jobs, and the importance of not leaving communities decimated by a transition such as happened in the 80s. But in terms of within the movement, yeah, we need to have those conversations. We need to have those debates in a way which is comradely, but we have taken our stands on some of these things. So yeah, that's
thank you
about that really.
So I'm going to go to Anne Gray and then Mark Douglas, and Nicole had her hand up and then put it down and put it back up. So to give us a gender balanced sequence, if we go to Anne and then Mark and then Nicole and then Ian, apologies for that, Ian, but I think it will be the interest of balance. It's the right thing to do. So let us go now to Anne Gray, please.
Thank you. I'm sorry I missed the beginning of this meeting. I may have missed something important. I was trying to attend the tax group as well in James' time slot. Is there anything in this document about conversion of the arms industry? Because I do feel that with all of the outrage people are feeling about destruction in the Ukraine, now is a very good time to call for massive dismantling of the industries that produce all these awful bombs and military aircraft and shells and stuff. But we need somewhere for those jobs to be recreated. So is this now the time, and can we make a strong plea for that? Thank you.
Ellen, I think that's a fairly self-explanatory question.
Yeah, and well, it has quite a short answer. Actually, that's not something that's been considered, other than at a glancing reference in the booklet. But I think that's absolutely right. That it is a really important consideration, and I think it just also. It reminds me of one of the other important things is that really that in terms of creating solidarity, it's much important to have links between the different sort of, there are we need links with anti-war campaigners, links with anti-poverty campaigners, and we need to be very much drawing attention to the fact that all of these things are connected. But of course, yeah, now more than at any other time, but always, yeah, the military is a massive consideration in this. And one of the things, as the speaker said, that we do need to have. Because it's one of the things that is presented to people as join the military, you will have a secure skilled job, and you'll have a place to belong and something to be proud of. The ways that this type of work is marketed to young people in particular, which I always feel is distressingly exploitative of young people. And it's got to stop. But we have to be providing an alternative.
Thank you, Ellen. Perhaps just 2 seconds for a very quick anecdote. I was at a peace vigil for Ukraine last night, in which there was a lady present who said that she had once worked for a company who had sent her on a visit to a company who produced solder, and they were taken by a salesperson for a tour around the works, and this salesperson was saying, do you know that every bullet that's ever manufactured contains a small amount of solder? And he said, every time there's a war, we are rubbing our hands with glee on the way to the bank. And that was just an extraordinarily chilling and very precise and laser-focused account of how the military-industrial complex profits from war. However, I digress. We go next to Mark Douglas, and then to Nicole, and then to Ian. Mark, please.
Hello, everybody from Hackney. Congratulations on your new booklet. We've read the previous editions, the Million Climate Jobs, with interest over the years. And we're in Green Left, we're working on a Green Socialist New Deal, which we hope will incorporate a lot of the policies that are in this booklet. I mean, it's an excellent job, and I do congratulate you on it. I have just 2 proposals to make, which is that Green Left should buy 50 copies of this booklet, and members can buy from Green Left, okay? Secondly, I think we should co-sponsor a national publicity leaflet promoting this booklet and co-sponsor it from Green Left. And we can all go out and distribute leaflets to support this booklet and get more people to read it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Now, as I said, I have, for the benefit of those attending this meeting, I have posted a copy of the booklet, a downloadable PDF, in the chat, so you can see that. I think, Mark, if you were to raise that as a proposal at our next regular business meeting, as opposed to this special speaker meeting, I'm sure it would gain a lot of support, and please, I encourage you to make that proposal formally. But for Ellen, I think that's just a formal record of our appreciation of the great work that has gone on. So next we're going to go to Nicole, and then to Ian, and then to Kat, and then to Martin. So Nicole next, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Danny. I'd like to go back to the issue about nuclear, if you don't mind, very briefly. The idea of more nuclear power plants, whether they're modular or otherwise, absolutely scares me to death. Look at the way Putin is threatening to use these nuclear plants as a weapon of mass destruction. We must get away from this idea that we need more nuclear power as it is now. The waste issue is definitely not being sorted. I always wondered why we go into the moon. Well, maybe it's because that's where we could dump our nuclear waste. Anyway, nuclear fission is definitely the answer for the future. And although, as pointed out by Ellen, it's going to take possibly 2 decades to actually make it viable, it is an absolutely fantastic engineering scientific breakthrough, which is going to revolutionize all the energy sources for the whole planet for the next, as soon as we've managed to turn it into an industrial production. Now, there is a certain amount of kind of reluctance, I think, sometimes from socialists to actually embrace modern technology. And I think it's really sad because, the nuclear fission is the future. And imagine a world where energy costs nothing and it is carbon neutral. I mean, it's unimaginable right now, but it will happen before the end of the century. And the thing is, COVID, how long did it take to produce this vaccine? A year, where most people thought it would take 10 years or more. When the whole world scientific community puts their head together and the money is there, whether we like it or not, capitalist money, obviously, but the money is there to invest into these technologies, it happens. I mean, okay, you may say I'm a born optimist, but I think we really need to think positively about nuclear fission and stop talking about having more nuclear fusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Now, I have to say I'm grateful for the contribution. If we were starting out with another hour in front of us, yeah, I'm sure we could begin to scratch the surface of doing justice to the subject. Maybe, Nicole, you could propose that as a special subject meeting in future, and perhaps we could cast around for some specialist speakers on it, because clearly it's of great interest, central to much of our thinking about the future, but we may not have time to do justice to it in the next 10 minutes or so. So as promised, we're going to go to Ian, and then to Kat, and then to Martin, and that may be as much as we can accommodate in the space of this meeting, but let us see. Depends on the duration of the contribution still to come. Let's go then straight to Ian. Ian, over to you.
Yes, hello, Ian McDonald from Maidstone. This session, I came late to it, I'm afraid, but it is a breath of fresh air, and I'm very pleased with the discussion so far. But my question is possibly to Danny to ask, are the links to Green Left Facebook page part of the control by this group? Because if so, I'm frankly appalled by the intrusions and trolling that we get on that Facebook site from anarchists, trots, Stalinists, and Labour disconsolates who seem to have a collective desire to emasculate anything that the Green Party is doing and to be contemptuous of us. In fact, on some debates, it's so appalling, I just can't bear to stay on the page any longer. Can you shed any light on that? And if it is under our control, why are we so indulgent to all these trolls?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm grateful for the fact that you enjoy the meeting and find it to be a breath of fresh air. Secondly, can I make a request, please, Ian, that you contact me directly, or you can find my contact details on the members' website as the co-chair of Green Left. We do have some people here who are on the editorial committee who vet some of the posts, but the intention of that Facebook site is that it represents an open forum for lots of different perspectives across the left in the UK. We do exclude things which are designed to be offensive, which are designed to be name calling, which we consider to be trolling. But in terms of political content, we take quite a universalist approach, and we tend to be quite accommodating of pretty much everything. But rather than turn this into a discussion about how Green Left as an organisation manages its social media, and it's a perfectly good conversation to have, and we are absolutely happy to have it. Please, Ian, if I could crave your indulgence, and let's perhaps deal with that separately. That I'd really appreciate.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Just out of respect for today's guest speaker.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. So we go next to Kat and then to Martin. Over to Kat now, please.
Hello, Kat Newnham, Brecon and Radnorshire, Green Party. Sorry, apologies for coming late, and thanks so much for this. What I heard of the speaker. I'm sorry I didn't catch a name. I'd just like to ask about land use and how important that is, and how important the transition to a sort of post-carbon economy is. As somebody coming from a rural area, I'd really like to know whether, well, firstly, how protections for habitats and countryside has been considered, and secondly, whether there's whether anybody's doing any work on kind of building up a resource that's a kind of map of land use or recommended land use or community sanctioned land use or something like that, so that when we do hopefully get some means of state being able to roll out a different kind of land use, that we've got some kind of resource to land it onto, if that makes any sense.
Ellen, consideration of land use. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of the sections that I skipped over and didn't go into detail, but mainly for that very reason, that there is just so much to be said about it. It's so absolutely key. I mean, particularly now that we're as the Monday's latest release from the IPCC pointed out, that we're really largely into a phase of adaptation and resilience, as well as mitigation of emissions. Yeah, it's all of those things, and I think that what the last speakers just articulated is one of the clearest reasons why we do need something like a national climate service, or as some people have proposed, either within that or separately, a national nature service, which would not only directly employ people in the rural jobs that are needed, but also would do those things like having an inventory of the different types of land, who owns them, what they're suitable for, what kind of work is going on, and sort of integrate things. I mean, one of the things that I've noted myself is, if we think about all the different claims on land use, we need to move to regenerative agriculture methods, or some people would describe it as permaculture, or use other terms for that, or agroecology, all of which is very much more labour intensive. We need reforestation has to be appropriate. There's a lot of inappropriate tree planting going on that's actually damaging other kinds of soils and ecologies, and we need peatland restoration. We need to work out how much land we can give over to sheep farming, given that, you know, they produce quite a bit of methane, and a lot of land, but largely inaccessible land for other purposes, and their wool is a good insulating material. But then, you know, there are so many different different things here that kind of need to be coordinated and considered together rather than separately. But yeah, what I would say is that one thing we do know is that rural poverty is a very serious problem. Wages in land work are very, very low, apart from, you know, the wealthy landowners. And I think that it's like in a lot of other sectors, that when I think about the National Climate Service, I think there's a big role for people to be directly employed within that as a public service, in a way that's comparable to being employed in the health service, for example. But also there are a large number of people doing really cutting edge stuff in, you know, organic farms and community supported agriculture projects and things. And we need to be able to integrate this without actually, whilst improving conditions, scaling up those kinds of things, but not actually getting in the way of people that are trying to do the stuff as well. So that's really only kind of initial thoughts, but it is important.
Thank you, Ellen. And quite possibly, given the time, the last question or contribution for this afternoon goes to Martin Francis. Martin.
Hi, yeah. I think it's a question about the National Climate Service in terms of its democratic control or democratic accountability, thinking what can happen to other national services, such as the NHS and its privatisation. But what I wanted to say was, and it's on land really, I went to the housing policy group earlier in the week. I think Kat may have been there and Lois was there. And we were talking about land and its value and so on, and retrofitting. And it strikes me that with the Green New Deal that we are putting forward, and perhaps with this booklet, we need to look at Green Party policy horizontally across all the different areas, rather than having a Green New Deal standing on its own. So we as Green Left need to be involved in a housing group, taking out of the Green New Deal or the climate booklet those policies that should be integrated into that area. Same with social care, education, and quite a number of agricultural policy, for example. We need to be thinking that way and making a real intervention in our various policies so it's integrated in the Green Party's approach.
I think music to my ears, Martin, and something very close to what I have believed for some time. I believe we now no longer have time for any more contributions. What I should do is once again provide a link to Watermelon, which is a special publication that we've put together as Green Left specifically for this conference. We produce as Green Left an edition of Watermelon for each conference, and the one that we've produced for this conference is an online one, and I'll just put in the chat once more a link to that. And that, amongst other things, will provide you with contact details for Green Left, which, as I say, exists as a body to discuss questions from an eco-socialist perspective, to promote those eco-socialist views and agendas within the Green Party, to work with other organisations on the left in the UK and internationally to keep ourselves informed and to use that experience in turn to feed back into our work within the Green Party. If you're interested in that kind of work, if you're interested in the kind of subjects that have been discussed today, then please do get in touch and do join us. It only remains for me really to say a big thank you, first of all, to Cameron Burstall, who on behalf of the Conferences Committee and Conferences team has been providing technical assistance for us this afternoon. To all of you for coming along and taking part in the discussion and listening to the contributions, but most of all, of course, to our guest speaker today from the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group, Ellen Rowbottom. So please come off mute and let's hear your appreciation for Ellen.
Hey, thank you very much.